Two armored military Humvees exploded through the emergency bay doors of Riverside Medical Center in Phoenix, Arizona at 2:47 a.m. Soldiers in full combat gear poured into the trauma unit, rifles raised, shouting commands that sent patients diving under gurneys and nurses screaming into supply closets. A wounded man in torn fatigues was dragged across blood-smeared linoleum, his face gray, his breathing wet and shallow. And there, frozen mid-step with a medication tray still balanced in her hands, stood a thin blonde nurse the entire hospital had spent months trying to fire. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. The soldiers saw her and stopped cold. The wounded man's eyes rolled toward her face, and his cracked lips formed two words that made every doctor in that room go silent. Lieutenant Archer. Sarah's fingers tightened on the tray. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed, because Sarah Mitchell wasn't supposed to exist anymore. If you want to know how a nurse everyone thought was broken became the one person who could bring down an entire criminal empire, stay with me until the very end. Drop a like, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can travel. Sarah Mitchell had been a ghost at Riverside Medical for 11 months, and that was exactly how she wanted it. She worked the night shift in the trauma unit, the hours nobody else wanted, the patients nobody else could save, the cases that came in broken and left worse. She kept her head down, her voice quiet, her past buried so deep that even she sometimes forgot it existed. The other nurses whispered about her when they thought she couldn't hear. They called her cold, robotic. The Ice Queen with the dead eyes. One of the ER techs had started a running joke that Sarah was actually a military robot programmed to distribute meds and judge people silently. She never corrected them. Dr. Marcus Brennan, the trauma unit's head surgeon, hated her from the moment she walked through the door. He was tall, sharp-featured, expensive-looking in the way that only private practice surgeons ever managed to be. His voice carried through hallways like he wanted everyone within 3 floors to know exactly how important he was. He wore custom scrubs and a watch that cost more than Sarah's annual salary, and he treated nurses like sentient furniture. "Mitchell!" he snapped one night during a code, his gloved hands slick with blood as he worked over a car accident victim. "Suction. Now!" Sarah handed him the suction catheter without a word. "Not that one. The other one. Jesus Christ, do you even know what you're doing?" She swapped it out, still silent. "You know what your problem is," Brennan said, not looking up. "You think because you were in the army or whatever, you're special. You're not. You're a nurse. Act like it." Sarah didn't answer. She just held the retractor steady while Brennan worked, her hands absolutely still, even as the patient's blood pressure dropped and the monitors started screaming. "Pressure's dropping," one of the residents said nervously. "I can see that," Brennan snapped. "Mitchell, push 2 units of ONEG." Sarah didn't move. Brennan's head jerked up. "Did you hear me?" "He doesn't need more volume," Sarah said quietly. "He's bleeding into his abdomen. You need to open him up." The room went dead silent. Brennan stared at her like she'd just spit in his face. "Excuse me?" "He's got a ruptured spleen," Sarah continued, her voice flat and clinical. "You're pumping blood into a leaking container. If you don't get surgical control in the next 3 minutes, he's going to arrest." For a moment, Brennan looked like he was going to throw her out of the room. Then the patient's vitals tanked, the monitors screamed louder, and Brennan cursed under his breath as he grabbed a scalpel and sliced the man open right there in the trauma bay. Sarah had been right. Brennan never thanked her. He just glared at her after the case was over and said, "Next time, keep your opinions to yourself." That was 4 months ago. Since then, Brennan had made it his personal mission to humiliate her. He wrote her up for insubordination when she questioned unsafe protocols. He reassigned her to the worst cases, the overdoses, the psych holds, the violent drunks who came in swinging. He told the nursing director that Sarah was difficult to work with and clearly dealing with unresolved trauma. The other nurses started avoiding her. Nobody wanted to be associated with the woman Brennan was actively trying to fire. Sarah took it all without a word, because staying invisible was the only thing keeping her alive. Whack. The call came in at 2:39 a.m. on a Tuesday. Sarah was restocking a crash cart when the radio crackled to life. "Riverside, this is dispatch. We have an inbound military transport, ETA 8 minutes. Single male patient, gunshot wound to the chest, classified escort. Repeat, Classified escort. Clear your trauma bay. The charge nurse, a sharp-eyed woman named Grace, grabbed the radio. Dispatch, can you clarify classified escort? Negative, just clear the bay. They're coming in hot. Grace looked at Sarah. You hear that? Sarah's hand stilled on the supply cart. Yeah. Military transport usually means VIP or something political. Brennan's going to want to handle this personally. Grace paused. You okay? Sarah nodded once. I'm fine. She wasn't fine. Her chest felt tight, her pulse too fast. She forced herself to keep moving, keep restocking, keep breathing. It's nothing. Just another patient. Just another shift. You're fine. But when the Humvees exploded through the ambulance bay doors 8 minutes later, Sarah knew she wasn't fine at all. The trauma bay erupted into chaos. Soldiers in full tactical gear stormed inside, rifles up, scanning the room like they expected an ambush. Nurses scattered. A resident tripped over a supply cart and hit the floor hard. Dr. Brennan came sprinting out of his office, his face red, his voice booming. What the hell is this? He shouted. You can't just... A soldier stepped forward, his hand raised. Sir, step back. This is a federal matter. This is my hospital, Brennan shot back. You want to bring a patient in here? You follow our protocols. Sir, step back. Brennan's jaw clenched, but he moved aside. The wounded man was dragged in on a stretcher, his fatigues torn and soaked with blood. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, his chest bandaged with field dressings that were already saturated. Sarah caught a glimpse of his shoulder patch, a unit insignia she recognized instantly, and her stomach dropped. No, it can't be. She backed up, trying to stay out of sight, but the wounded man's eyes were already moving, searching the room. His gaze locked onto her, and his entire body went rigid. Lieutenant, he rasped, his voice barely audible. Lieutenant Archer. Every sound in the room cut off like someone had sliced through the air with a blade. Sarah stood frozen, her hand still gripping the medication tray. The soldiers turned toward her, their expression shifting from alert to something close to shock. Dr. Brennan stared at her, his face twisted in confusion. What the hell is he talking about? Brennan demanded. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. The wounded man's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. His fingers were cold, slick with blood. They found us, he whispered, his voice cracking. Lieutenant, they found us. One of the soldiers stepped forward, his rifle lowering slightly. Ma'am, he said carefully, we need to secure this patient. If you have any information— She doesn't, Brennan interrupted, his voice sharp. She's a nurse. She doesn't know anything. The soldier ignored him. His eyes stayed locked on Sarah. Ma'am, do you know this man? Sarah's throat felt like sandpaper. She looked down at the wounded man, at the blood seeping through his bandages, at the fear in his eyes, at the unit patch she'd once worn herself. No, she said quietly. Liar, the wounded man whispered. You're Archer. You're... His body convulsed. Alarm screamed. The monitors lit up red as his blood pressure plummeted and his oxygen levels crashed. He's coding, one of the residents shouted. Brennan shoved past Sarah, barking orders. Get him on the table. Start compressions. Somebody page surgery. The trauma bay exploded into motion. Nurses swarmed the patient, hands moving fast, voices overlapping. Sarah stepped back, her mind racing, her pulse hammering in her ears. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. But it was, because the man on that table wasn't just any soldier. He was part of a unit that had been declared dead 3 years ago. A unit that had been erased from every official record, every database, every file. A unit that Sarah Mitchell, Lieutenant Sarah Archer, had commanded during a classified operation overseas. A unit that had been ambushed, slaughtered, and buried in a mass grave that didn't officially exist. And now one of them was dying in her trauma bay. Sis. Brennan worked fast, his hands steady as he intubated the patient and started chest compressions. The soldiers stood back, their rifles still raised, their eyes scanning the room like they expected an attack at any second. Who the hell is this guy? Brennan demanded, not looking up. Classified, one of the soldiers said flatly. Classified doesn't help me save his life. You don't need to know, just stabilize him. Brennan shot the soldier a murderous look but kept working. Sarah watched from the edge of the room, her hands clenched into fists. She knew she should leave. She knew she should disappear before anyone started asking questions she couldn't answer, but she couldn't move. Because the man on that table had been part of her team. He'd been one of the soldiers she'd led into hell and barely brought back alive. And if he was here, if he'd been shot, if someone had found him, they're cleaning up. The thought hit her like a punch to the chest. They're killing everyone who survived. Her vision narrowed. Her breathing slowed. She scanned the room, cataloging exits, counting soldiers, calculating how long it would take to get to the supply closet where the emergency trauma kits were stored. Old instincts kicked in, muscle memory she hadn't used in 3 years, and for a brief, terrible moment, she wasn't Sarah Mitchell anymore. She was Lieutenant Archer, and Lieutenant Archer didn't run. "Pulse is back," one of the residents announced. "BP's stabilizing." Brennan stepped back, breathing hard. "Okay, we need to get him to surgery. Grace, call the OR and tell them we're coming up." "Already done," Grace said. The soldiers moved forward, flanking the stretcher. "We're coming with him," one of them said. "The hell you are," Brennan shot back. "This is a sterile environment. You stay down here." "Sir, this is a federal matter. I don't care if it's a presidential matter. You're not bringing guns into my operating room." The soldier's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Fine, but 2 of us stay outside the OR, non-negotiable." Brennan muttered something under his breath, but didn't argue. The stretcher was wheeled toward the elevators, and the trauma bay slowly emptied out. Sarah stayed where she was, her back pressed against the wall, her mind still racing. She needed to leave. She needed to disappear before anyone connected the dots. But before she could move, one of the soldiers stepped in front of her. He was younger than the others, maybe mid-20s, with sharp eyes and a scar running down his left cheek. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're Sarah Mitchell," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Sarah didn't answer. "You work the night shift. You've been here 11 months. You keep to yourself." He paused. "You're also Lieutenant Sarah Archer, Delta Unit 7. Officially declared KYA 3 years ago during Operation Sandstorm." Sarah's chest tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yeah, you do." The soldier leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. "And if that guy upstairs wakes up and starts talking, a lot of people are going to know it too." Sarah's pulse hammered in her ears. "What do you want?" "I want you to stay put," the soldier said, "because my orders are to secure this hospital and make sure nobody leaves until we figure out what the hell is going on." "Your orders from who?" The soldier smiled faintly. "Someone who's very interested in finding out how a dead lieutenant ended up working in a Phoenix ER." Before Sarah could respond, the soldier turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the empty trauma bay. And for the first time in 3 years, Sarah Mitchell realized she was out of time. Brennan found her 20 minutes later, pacing in the hallway outside the staff lounge. "Mitchell," he said sharply. "What the hell was that?" Sarah stopped. "What was what?" "Don't play dumb. That patient called you lieutenant. He knew you." "He was confused," Sarah said flatly. "He'd been shot. He was in shock." "Bullshit." Brennan stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I've been trying to figure you out for months. You don't talk to anyone. You don't go to staff meetings. You show up, do your shift, and vanish. And now soldiers are storming my ER looking for some classified patient who apparently knows you by name." Sarah met his gaze, her expression blank. "I don't know him." "Then why did he call you lieutenant?" "I don't know." Brennan's eyes narrowed. "You're lying." Sarah didn't blink. "Think whatever you want." "I will." Brennan's voice turned cold. "And when this is over, I'm going to make sure you're out of this hospital for good. I don't care what your story is. You're a liability, and I don't keep liabilities on my staff." He turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone in the hallway. She waited until his footsteps faded. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in 3 years. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, low, rough, familiar. "Archer," the voice said quietly. "I was wondering when you'd call." Sarah closed her eyes. "He found me, didn't he?" "Yeah," a pause. "And he's not the only one looking." Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. "How long do I have?" "Maybe a day, maybe less. They're moving fast, Archer. If you're smart, you'll run." Sarah looked down the hallway, at the soldiers standing guard outside the OR, at the nurses whispering nervously behind the desk, at the hospital that had become her hiding place for the last 11 months. "I'm done running," she said quietly. Then you're going to need help. I know. Good. The voice on the other end paused. Because they're coming for you tonight. And this time, they're not leaving witnesses. The line went dead. Sarah stood there for a long moment, staring at her phone. Then she slipped it back into her pocket and walked toward the trauma bay. Because if they were coming for her, she wasn't going to make it easy. And if that meant burning down everything she'd spent 3 years building, so be it. Lieutenant Sarah Archer was done hiding. The trauma bay was emptier now, quieter, but Sarah could still smell the blood. She grabbed a pair of surgical gloves from the supply cabinet and snapped them on, her movements automatic. The soldiers were upstairs guarding the OR. Brennan was probably scrubbing in. The rest of the night staff had scattered to their usual posts, whispering about what they'd just witnessed. Nobody was watching her. Sarah moved quickly. She crossed to the computer terminal behind the nursing station and logged in using her credentials. The system was slow, outdated, the kind of hospital software that froze every third click. She pulled up the patient registry and searched for the wounded soldier's name. Nothing. No name, no patient ID, no intake records. Just a blank admission form with a timestamp and the words "classified hold" stamped across the top in red. Sarah's jaw tightened. She tried accessing the trauma notes Brennan had entered during the code, but those were locked too. Restricted access. Administrator override required. They'd already scrubbed him from the system. She logged out and stepped back, her mind working through possibilities. If they were erasing his records this fast, it meant someone higher up was involved. Someone with access to federal databases and hospital administration. Someone who knew exactly how to make people disappear. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. Loading dock, 5 minutes, alone. Sarah stared at the message. She didn't recognize the number, but she knew who'd sent it. The voice on the phone earlier, the one person who'd helped her disappear 3 years ago and hadn't contacted her since. She pocketed the phone and headed for the loading dock. The hallway was deserted. Sarah pushed through the staff exit and stepped into the cold night air. The loading dock was a concrete platform at the back of the hospital, surrounded by dumpsters and empty delivery trucks. A single overhead light flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the pavement. A man stepped out from behind one of the trucks. He was older than Sarah remembered, maybe 50 now, with gray threading through his dark hair and new lines carved deep around his eyes. He wore a black jacket and jeans, nothing military, nothing official. But Sarah recognized him instantly. "Reeves," she said quietly. Jacob Reeves had been her commanding officer during Operation Sandstorm. He'd been the one who'd pulled her out of the desert after the ambush, the one who'd helped her fake her death, the one who'd told her to disappear and never look back. He looked tired now, worn down. "You look different," Reeves said. "Blonde suits you." "What are you doing here?" "Saving your ass. Again." Reeves glanced toward the hospital. "That soldier upstairs. His name's Danny Ortega. He was part of your unit. You remember him?" Sarah nodded slowly. "He was communications. Quiet kid, good with tech. He's not quiet anymore. 3 days ago, someone put 2 bullets in his chest and left him bleeding out in a parking garage in Tucson. He managed to call for help before he passed out. Military transport picked him up and brought him here." "Why here?" "Because this hospital's off the grid," Reeves said. "No federal contracts, no military oversight, no reason for anyone to look twice. It was supposed to be a safe drop point." He paused. "But someone knew he'd be here. Someone's been tracking survivors." Sarah's chest tightened. "How many are left?" "Out of your unit? Maybe 4. Maybe less. We've lost contact with 2 in the last month. And you think they're being hunted?" "I know they are." Reeves stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Ortega told the medics before he went under that someone's cleaning house. Everyone connected to Sandstorm is getting erased, and that includes you." Sarah's pulse hammered in her ears. "Who's doing it?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Reeves pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and handed it to her. "Ortega had this in his pocket when they found him. Recognize it?" Sarah unfolded the paper. It was a photograph, old, grainy, printed on cheap copy paper. The image showed a group of soldiers standing outside a desert compound, their faces sunburned and exhausted. Sarah recognized herself immediately, standing in the center of the group with her rifle slung over one shoulder. But it wasn't the photo that made her stomach drop. It was the red X drawn over her face. Someone's marking targets, Reeves said quietly. And you're next. Sarah folded the paper and handed it back. Then why are you here? If I'm a target, being near me makes you one too. Because I owe you. Reeves's expression hardened. You saved my life in that desert. You pulled me out of a burning Humvee while people were shooting at us. You carried 2 wounded soldiers for 3 miles through enemy territory. So yeah, I'm here. And I'm not leaving until we figure out who's behind this. Sarah looked away. I can't do this again, Reeves. I'm done with that life. That life's not done with you. Before Sarah could respond, the loading dock door slammed open. Grace, the charge nurse, stumbled outside, her face pale. Sarah, she shouted, we need you upstairs, now. Sarah's chest tightened. What happened? It's Ortega. He's awake, and he's asking for you. Sarah and Reeves exchanged a glance. Then Sarah was moving, sprinting back into the hospital with Reeves close behind. They took the stairs 2 at a time, ignoring the elevators, and burst onto the surgical floor just as alarms started screaming from the OR. The hallway was chaos. Nurses were running, doctors shouting orders, and the 2 soldiers who'd been standing guard were now inside the OR with their rifles raised. Brennan stormed out, his surgical mask pulled down, his face furious. Mitchell, he roared, what the hell did you do? Sarah skidded to a stop. What are you talking about? Your patient just woke up mid-surgery and started screaming your name. He pulled out his breathing tube, ripped out his IV, and tried to get off the table. We had to sedate him. Brennan's voice was shaking with rage. So I'll ask you again, what the hell did you do? Sarah pushed past him and looked through the OR window. Ortega was strapped to the table now, his chest still open, his eyes rolling wildly as the anesthesiologist worked to put him back under. But before the drugs took hold, Ortega's gaze locked onto Sarah through the glass. His lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear. Run. Then his eyes closed and his body went limp. Sarah stepped back, her heart pounding. Brennan grabbed her arm and spun her around. I want answers, he snarled. Right now. Who is he? Why does he know you? And why are there armed soldiers in my hospital? I don't know, Sarah said flatly. Bullshit. Reeves stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. She said she doesn't know. Back off. Brennan's eyes narrowed. And who the hell are you? Someone who outranks you. Reeves pulled a badge from his jacket and flashed it. Federal credentials, Department of Defense. This is a classified matter. You're going to finish that surgery, stabilize your patient, and keep your mouth shut. Understood? Brennan's face went red. This is my hospital. Not anymore. Reeves pocketed the badge. As of right now, this facility is under federal jurisdiction. You have a problem with that, take it up with Washington. For a moment, Sarah thought Brennan was going to explode. Then he turned and stormed back into the OR, slamming the door behind him. Grace appeared at Sarah's side, her voice low. Sarah, what's going on? I don't know, Sarah said quietly. But you need to stay away from me. All of you. Sarah, I mean it, Grace. Whatever this is, it's not safe. Grace opened her mouth to argue, but something in Sarah's expression stopped her. She nodded slowly and stepped back. Reeves touched Sarah's shoulder. We need to move. If Ortega knows you're here, whoever shot him knows too. Sarah turned toward him. Where? Somewhere secure. Somewhere we can figure out what the hell is happening before a gunshot cracked through the hallway. The OR window exploded inward, glass spraying across the floor. One of the soldiers dropped, blood pouring from his neck. The second soldier spun toward the hallway, his rifle coming up, but another shot punched through his chest and he collapsed. Nurses screamed. Doctors dove for cover. Brennan shouted something from inside the OR, but his voice was drowned out by the alarms. Sarah's training kicked in instantly. She grabbed Grace and shoved her toward the stairwell. Go! Now! Grace didn't argue. She ran. Reeves had his weapon out, a compact pistol he'd pulled from somewhere under his jacket. He moved toward the hallway entrance, his body low, his movements precise. Sarah, he said quietly, get down. Sarah dropped behind the nursing station just as another shot tore through the wall above her head. Reeves fired back twice, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Someone in the hallway shouted, and heavy footsteps echoed on the tile floor. "They're coming in fast," Reeves said. "We need to move." Sarah's mind raced. The stairwell was blocked. The elevators were too slow. The only other exit was through the OR, but that meant crossing open ground with active shooters in the hallway. She looked at Reeves. "Can you cover me?" "For what?" "I'm going to get Ortega." Reeves stared at her. "Are you insane? He's mid-surgery. If they're here for him, we can't leave him." Sarah stood, ignoring the bullets still punching through the walls. "Cover me. 3 seconds." Reeves cursed under his breath. Then he leaned out and fired 3 rapid shots down the hallway. Sarah didn't wait. She sprinted toward the OR, glass crunching under her shoes, and slammed through the door. Brennan whirled toward her, his gloved hand still inside Ortega's chest. "What the hell are you—" "We're leaving," Sarah snapped. "Now! I'm in the middle of surgery. He's stable enough. Close him up." Brennan's face went purple. "I will not—" Sarah grabbed a scalpel from the instrument tray and held it up. "You have 10 seconds to close that incision, or I'm doing it myself." Brennan's eyes went wide. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then slowly, he reached for the suture kit. "You're going to lose your license for this," he said through clenched teeth. "I don't care." Brennan worked fast, his hands shaking but steady enough. He closed the incision in less than 2 minutes, rough, messy, but functional. The anesthesiologist kept Ortega under while one of the surgical nurses disconnected the monitors. "He needs to stay intubated," Brennan said. "If you move him now, he could—" Another gunshot rang out, this one closer. The OR door shuddered, but held. Sarah grabbed the gurney and started wheeling Ortega toward the back exit. Brennan moved to stop her, but Reeves stepped into the OR, his gun still raised. "Let her go," Reeves said quietly. Brennan's hands dropped. He looked at Sarah, his expression somewhere between rage and confusion. "Who are you?" Sarah didn't answer. She just pushed the gurney through the back exit and into the service corridor beyond. The hallway was narrow, dimly lit, lined with supply closets and maintenance equipment. Sarah moved fast, her hands gripping the gurney rails, her mind calculating distances and exit routes. Reeves was behind her, walking backward, his gun trained on the door they'd just come through. "Where are we going?" Reeves asked. "Loading dock," Sarah said. "There's a service elevator 2 hallways over. And if they're waiting for us, then we improvise." They reached the elevator. Sarah jabbed the button, but nothing happened. She hit it again. Still nothing. "It's locked out," Reeves said. "They must have cut the power." Sarah cursed under her breath. She looked around, spotted a stairwell access door at the end of the hall. "There. Help me with the gurney." They lifted Ortega between them, moving as quickly as they could without jostling him too much. The stairwell was concrete and narrow, the air stale. Sarah's arms burned as they carried the gurney down 2 flights, then 3, the wheels scraping against the steps. They reached the ground floor. Sarah pushed through the door and found herself in a storage area near the loading dock. Empty pallets were stacked against the walls, and the smell of disinfectant hung heavy in the air. Reeves checked the exit. Clear. They moved outside. The loading dock was still deserted, the overhead light still flickering. Sarah's lungs burned as she sucked in the cold night air. "We need a vehicle," Reeves said. "Can you hotwire one of these trucks?" Sarah scanned the lot. Most of the delivery trucks were locked, but there was an old ambulance parked near the far corner, probably decommissioned, waiting to be sold off. "There," she said, pointing. They wheeled Ortega toward the ambulance. Sarah checked the doors. Locked. She grabbed a tire iron from one of the nearby trucks and smashed the driver's side window. The alarm didn't go off, probably disconnected. She climbed inside, popped the ignition cover, and started pulling wires. It had been years since she'd done this, but the muscle memory was still there. Spark, ground, starter. She twisted the wires together, and the engine coughed to life. Reeves loaded Ortega into the back, securing the gurney as best he could. Then he climbed into the passenger seat, his gun still in his lap. "Where to?" he asked. Sarah threw the ambulance into gear. "Somewhere they won't find us." She floored the accelerator, and the ambulance lurched forward, tires screeching as they peeled out of the loading dock and onto the street. Behind them, the hospital lights blazed in the darkness. Sarah didn't look back. She just drove, her hands tight on the wheel, her mind already racing ahead to the next move. because whoever was hunting them had just declared war. And Sarah Mitchell, Lieutenant Sarah Archer, was done running. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, weaving through side streets and industrial zones until Sarah was certain they weren't being followed. Then she pulled into an abandoned warehouse district on the east side of Phoenix and killed the engine. Reeves checked Ortega's vitals. He's stable. Barely. Sarah climbed into the back and looked down at the man she'd once commanded. His face was pale, his breathing shallow but steady. The rough sutures Brennan had thrown in were already starting to seep blood. He needs a real hospital, Reeves said. He needs to stay alive long enough to tell us who's doing this, Sarah replied. Ortega's eyes fluttered open. For a moment he just stared at the ceiling, disoriented. Then his gaze found Sarah, and something like relief crossed his face. "Lieutenant," he whispered. Sarah leaned closer. "I'm here. You're safe." "No!" Ortega's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was weak but desperate. "You're not. None of us are." "Who's doing this, Danny? Who shot you?" Ortega's eyes drifted closed. "The contractor, the one from Sandstorm. He's still alive." Sarah's blood went cold. "That's impossible. He died in the ambush." "No." Ortega's breathing hitched. "He didn't. He got out, and now he's cleaning up everyone who knows what really happened." Reeves leaned in. "What did happen?" Ortega coughed, blood flecking his lips. "The mission was a setup. The whole thing. We were sent to intercept a weapons shipment, but the shipment was bait. They wanted us dead. All of us." Sarah's hands tightened into fists. "Who wanted us dead?" "The contractor. And someone inside the DOD." Ortega's eyes locked onto hers. "Someone with access to classified operations. Someone who's been covering it up for 3 years." Sarah felt like the ground had dropped out from under her. "You're saying someone in our own chain of command set us up?" Ortega nodded weakly. "And now they're making sure nobody talks." Reeves's face had gone pale. "Do you know who?" Ortega's eyes started to drift closed again. "The doctor. The one at the hospital. He knows. He's part of it." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What doctor?" "Brennan," Ortega whispered. "Dr. Marcus Brennan. He's been falsifying records, covering up injuries. He's the one who helped the contractor disappear." Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. Brennan. The arrogant surgeon who'd spent months trying to get her fired. The man who'd just operated on Ortega. The man who now knew exactly where they were. "We need to move," Reeves said, his voice tight. "If Brennan's involved, he's already made the call. They'll be coming." Sarah looked down at Ortega. "Can you move?" Ortega's eyes closed. "No, leave me." "Not a chance." Sarah and Reeves lifted him carefully, moving him to a corner of the warehouse where a pile of old shipping pallets offered some cover. Reeves kept his gun trained on the entrance, while Sarah checked Ortega's bandages. "How long do you think we have?" Sarah asked. "Minutes? Maybe less." Sarah's mind raced through options. They couldn't run, not with Ortega in this condition. They couldn't fight. They were outnumbered and outgunned, and they couldn't call for help because they didn't know who to trust. "We need leverage," Sarah said quietly. Reeves looked at her. "What kind of leverage?" "The kind that makes them back off." Sarah pulled out her phone. "Brennan's been covering this up for 3 years. That means there's evidence, records, files, something that ties him to the contractor. And you think he just left that lying around?" "No. But I know where he keeps his personal files." Sarah stood. "His office, 3rd floor of the hospital. He's got a private server in there, off the hospital network, password protected. If there's evidence, that's where it'll be." Reeves stared at her. "You want to go back?" "It's the only way. That's suicide." "Maybe." Sarah checked the clip in Reeves's backup pistol, the one he'd been carrying in an ankle holster. "But if we don't stop this now, we're all dead anyway." Reeves was quiet for a long moment. Then he handed her the gun. "You've got 30 minutes. After that, I'm coming in after you." Sarah nodded. She looked down at Ortega one last time. His breathing was labored but steady. "Stay alive," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked out of the warehouse, back toward the one place she'd sworn she'd never return to. Riverside Medical Center. The hospital looked different now. Police cars surrounded the entrance. their lights flashing red and blue. News vans had already started to arrive, their satellite dishes extending toward the sky. Sarah watched from across the street, her mind working through the angles. They'd locked down the building. Every entrance would be guarded, every hallway monitored. Getting inside would be nearly impossible, unless she went through the one place nobody was watching. Sarah circled around to the east side of the hospital, where the old maintenance tunnels connected to the basement. She discovered them months ago while looking for a quiet place to eat lunch. The entrance was hidden behind a rusted access panel near the loading dock, the same loading dock she'd escaped from less than an hour ago. She pried the panel open and slipped inside. The tunnel was narrow and dark, lit only by emergency lights spaced every 20 feet. The air smelled like mold and old concrete. Sarah moved quickly, her footsteps echoing softly off the walls. The tunnel led to a service stairwell that connected to the main hospital. Sarah climbed 3 floors, listening for footsteps, voices, anything that would tell her where the guards were stationed. The 3rd floor was quiet, too quiet. Sarah eased the stairwell door open and peered into the hallway. Empty. She moved fast, keeping close to the walls, her borrowed pistol held low and ready. Brennan's office was at the end of the hall, behind a door marked Authorized Personnel Only. Sarah tried the handle. Locked. She pulled a paperclip from her pocket, something she'd been carrying out of habit since her military days, and worked the lock. It took 30 seconds. The door clicked open. Brennan's office was exactly what she'd expected. Expensive furniture, framed diplomas, a massive desk with dual monitors. And in the corner, a black server tower with blinking green lights. Sarah crossed to the desk and woke up the monitors. Password prompt. She tried a few obvious combinations. Brennan's birthday, his medical license number, variations of his name. Nothing worked. Think, what would an arrogant surgeon use as a password? Her eyes drifted to the framed photos on his desk. One showed Brennan standing on a yacht, holding a champagne glass. Another showed him receiving some kind of medical award, and a third showed him shaking hands with a man in a military uniform. Sarah leaned closer. The man in uniform had his back to the camera, but something about his build, his posture, looked familiar. She picked up the photo and turned it over. Written on the back in neat handwriting, Sandstorm Project 2022. Sarah's breath caught. She turned back to the computer and typed, Sandstorm 2022. The screen unlocked. Sarah's hands moved fast, navigating through folders, searching for anything that would connect Brennan to the contractor, to the ambush, to the cover-up. She found financial records first, wire transfers to offshore accounts, payments marked as consulting fees. Then communications, encrypted emails between Brennan and someone identified only as Falcon. She opened one of the emails. The last witness has been located. Phoenix, Riverside Medical. Handle it quietly. The response, understood. We'll clean up loose ends tonight. Sarah's stomach twisted. They'd known. Brennan had told them exactly where Ortega would be. She kept digging. More emails, more transfers. And then, buried in a subfolder marked classified, she found it. A mission report from Operation Sandstorm. Sarah opened the file, her hand shaking. The report detailed the mission exactly as she remembered it. The objective, the route, the extraction point. But then, halfway through, the narrative changed. There was a second objective, one Sarah had never been briefed on. The weapons shipment they'd been sent to intercept hadn't been enemy cargo, it had been American. Illegal arms being sold to insurgent groups by a defense contractor named Titan Security Solutions. The same contractor who'd been embedded with Sarah's unit. The same contractor who'd walked them straight into an ambush. And the person who'd authorized the operation, who'd signed off on the cover-up, who'd made sure nobody ever looked too closely at what really happened. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she saw the signature at the bottom of the report. Colonel Victor Hayes, Department of Defense. Hayes. The man who'd pulled her out of the desert. The man who'd helped her disappear. The man she'd trusted with her life. The man who'd been working with Brennan all along. Sarah's hands hovered over the keyboard. She needed to download this. She needed proof. She needed... The office door opened behind her. Sarah spun, her gun coming up. Dr. Marcus Brennan stood in the doorway, his expression cold. And behind him, 2 armed men in tactical gear, their rifles trained directly at her chest. "Hello, Lieutenant Archer," Brennan said quietly. "We've been waiting for you." Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger, but she didn't fire. Not yet. The math was simple. 2 armed men with automatic rifles versus 1 woman with a pistol. She'd be dead before the second shot left the barrel. Brennan stepped into the office, his hands relaxed at his sides. He looked different now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something colder, more calculated. "Put the gun down," he said quietly. Sarah kept it aimed at his chest. "You were there. In the desert. You were part of it." "I was a consultant. Titan Security hired me to provide medical support for their operations overseas." Brennan moved toward his desk, slow and careful. "I didn't know what they were really doing. Not at first. Bullshit. Believe what you want." Brennan gestured to the 2 armed men. "These gentlemen work for Titan. They've been very patient waiting for you to surface. But patience has limits." One of the armed men stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his left ear to his jaw. His rifle never wavered from Sarah's center mass. "Lieutenant Archer," he said, his voice flat, "you're coming with us." "Where?" "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere we can have a conversation about what you know and who you've told." Sarah's mind raced through scenarios. The office had 1 door, blocked. 1 window, 3rd floor, reinforced glass, no fire escape. No exits, no backup. No way out except through the 2 men with guns. She shifted her weight slightly, calculating angles. If she dropped and rolled left, she might get 1 shot off before they opened fire. Maybe 2 if she was lucky, but Brennan would escape, and the evidence on his computer would disappear. "The files are already uploaded," Sarah lied. "Cloud storage. If I don't check in every hour, they go public." Brennan smiled faintly. "No, they're not. We've been monitoring your phone since you left the loading dock. You haven't sent anything to anyone." Sarah's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression flat. "Then you know Reeves is still out there. And Ortega." "Ortega won't last the night," Brennan said, "and Reeves is being dealt with as we speak." Sarah's pulse hammered in her ears, but her voice stayed steady. "Hayes sent you, didn't he?" Brennan's expression didn't change. "Colonel Hayes is a patriot. He made difficult decisions to protect national security. You just happened to be collateral damage. We were soldiers. We trusted him." "You were expendable." Brennan leaned against his desk. The arms deal Titan was running. It was sanctioned at the highest levels. Black budget operations. Untraceable. But your unit stumbled onto evidence that could have exposed everything. So Hayes made a call. Better to lose 1 unit than compromise an entire operation. Sarah's jaw clenched. He murdered his own people. He did what was necessary. Brennan's voice was completely calm, like he was discussing a surgical procedure. "And he would have gotten away with it if you hadn't survived. If you just stayed dead like you were supposed to." The armed man with the scar stepped closer. "Enough talking. Let's move." Sarah's options collapsed to nothing. She could shoot Brennan. 1 bullet, center mass, he'd be dead before he hit the floor. But then the 2 armed men would kill her, and the evidence would disappear forever. Or she could surrender, hope for an opening later, and probably end up in a shallow grave somewhere in the desert. Neither option led anywhere good. So Sarah chose a 3rd option. She shot the computer. 3 rapid shots. Monitor, tower, hard drive. Sparks exploded from the server as the screens went black and smoke started pouring from the hardware. The armed men lunged forward, but Sarah was already moving. She kicked Brennan's desk chair into the first man's legs, throwing him off balance, then dove toward the window. She hit the reinforced glass shoulder first, and pain exploded through her upper body, but the glass held. The second man grabbed her from behind, his arm locking around her throat. Sarah drove her elbow back into his ribs. Once, twice, felt something crack. His grip loosened just enough for her to twist free and slam the butt of her pistol into his temple. He dropped. The first man was back on his feet, his rifle coming up. Sarah fired twice. 1 shot hit his shoulder, spinning him sideways. The second went wide, punching through the drywall. Brennan was shouting something, but Sarah couldn't hear over the ringing in her ears. She grabbed the desk chair and hurled it through the window. This time the glass shattered, and cold night air rushed into the office. 3 stories up. Maybe 30 feet to the ground. If she landed wrong, she'd break both legs. If she landed really wrong, she'd break her spine. But staying meant dying. Sarah climbed onto the window ledge. Below, the hospital's exterior was lit by floodlights and police cars. She could see officers moving near the entrance, could hear sirens wailing in the distance. The armed man with the shoulder wound raised his rifle. Sarah jumped. The fall lasted forever. Wind screamed past her ears. The ground rushed up impossibly fast. She tucked her body, rolled, tried to absorb the impact the way they'd taught her in airborne school. She hit the roof of a parked ambulance, and the metal crumpled beneath her weight. Pain shot through her left ankle and up her leg. She rolled off the ambulance and hit the pavement hard, her vision swimming. Shouts erupted from above. Footsteps pounded through the building. Sarah forced herself up, her ankle screaming protest. She limped toward the parking lot, staying low, using parked cars for cover. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with shaking hands. Text from Reeves. "They're here, warehouse compromised, moving Ortega. Where are you?" Sarah typed back one-handed. "Hospital. Brennan's Titan. Hayes 2. Get out of Phoenix." She sent the message and kept moving. Her ankle was swelling now, hot and tight inside her shoe, probably sprained, maybe fractured, but she couldn't stop. Not yet. Police were everywhere now, their radios crackling with static and urgent voices. Sarah blended into the chaos, just another hospital employee fleeing the building during an active shooter situation. She grabbed a discarded jacket from the ground and pulled it on, keeping her head down. A police officer stepped in front of her. "Ma'am, you need to evacuate to the staging area." "I'm medical staff," Sarah said quickly. "There are wounded inside. I need to get supplies from my car." The officer hesitated, then nodded and waved her through. Sarah made it to the employee parking lot before her ankle gave out completely. She collapsed against a car, breathing hard, her vision blurring at the edges. She needed to move, needed to find Reeves, needed to... A black SUV pulled up beside her, its engine rumbling. The passenger window rolled down and Sarah's hand went to her gun. But the weapon was gone. She'd dropped it somewhere during the fall. Jacob Reeves leaned across from the driver's seat. "Get in." Sarah didn't hesitate. She yanked the door open and collapsed into the passenger seat. Reeves hit the gas before she'd even closed the door, and the SUV peeled out of the parking lot. "Where's Ortega?" Sarah asked. "Safe house, 10 miles east." Reeves's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "4 of Titan's contractors hit the warehouse 5 minutes after you left. I barely got him out. They knew where we were." "Yeah." Reeves's jaw was tight. "They're tracking us somehow. Phone, maybe. Or something in Ortega's bloodstream." Sarah's mind raced. Medical implant. Brennan would have had access during surgery. RFID chip, subcutaneous tracker, something small enough to inject. "Can we remove it?" "If we can find it." Sarah looked down at her swelling ankle. "But we need supplies, real medical equipment, and we need it fast." Reeves made a hard left onto a side street. "There's a veterinary clinic 2 miles from here. Owner's a friend. He won't ask questions." Vet clinic. Surgical tools are surgical tools. The clinic was dark when they arrived, locked up tight for the night. Reeves parked in the alley behind the building and pulled out his phone. 3 minutes later, a side door opened and a gray-haired man in a bathrobe appeared. "Jacob," the man said quietly. "What the hell did you get into?" "Better you don't know, Marcus." Reeves helped Sarah out of the SUV. "We need your clinic for an hour, maybe 2. Marcus looked at Sarah's ankle, at the blood on her jacket, at the desperate look in Reeves's eyes. Then he stepped aside and held the door open. 1 hour, he said. "Then I'm calling the police." They carried Ortega inside and laid him on the examination table in the main surgical suite. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale and clammy. Sarah checked his vitals, pulse weak but steady, blood pressure dropping, temperature elevated. "He's going into shock," Sarah said. "We need to find that tracker and get him to a real hospital." Reeves pulled out a handheld RFID scanner, military grade, something he'd probably lifted from a supply depot. He ran it over Ortega's body, starting at his head and working down. The scanner beeped near Ortega's left shoulder. Sarah grabbed a scalpel from the instrument tray. "Hold him still." She made a small incision just below Ortega's collarbone, her hand steady, despite the adrenaline screaming through her system. Blood welled up, and she used gauze to clear the field. There, just beneath the muscle tissue, a small capsule, maybe 5 millimeters long. She extracted it with forceps and dropped it into a metal tray. The capsule was smooth, black, inert-looking. "That's it," Reeves said quietly. Sarah sutured the incision closed, then bandaged it quickly. We need to move him again. If they were tracking this, they know we're here. Where do we go? Somewhere public. Somewhere they can't make a move without witnesses. Sarah looked at Reeves. The news. We go to the media. Reeves stared at her. You want to expose this publicly? It's the only way to stay alive. Sarah cleaned her hands and grabbed fresh gauze for her ankle. Brennan and Hayes have been covering this up for 3 years. If we go public, they can't kill us without making it worse. They'll deny everything. It'll be our word against a decorated colonel and a respected surgeon. Not if we have proof. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened the Photos app. Before she'd shot Brennan's computer, she'd taken pictures of the screen, the mission report, the emails, the financial transfers, everything. Reeves looked at the photos, his expression grim. This could work. It has to. They loaded Ortega back into the SUV and headed for downtown Phoenix. Sarah navigated using her phone, looking for the local news stations. Channel 7 had their broadcast center on Central Avenue, a 4-story building with satellite dishes on the roof and news vans parked in the lot. Reeves pulled up to the entrance. You sure about this? Sarah looked at him. You got a better idea? No? Then let's go. They walked through the front doors, 2 exhausted people in blood-stained clothes carrying an unconscious man between them. The security guard behind the desk jumped to his feet. Hey, you can't... We need to speak to a reporter, Sarah said. Right now, it's about government corruption and murder. The security guard's hand went to his radio. I'm calling the police. Good, Sarah said. Call them. Call everyone. We're not leaving until we talk to someone on camera. The guard hesitated, clearly uncertain. Then a door opened behind him, and a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a navy blazer stepped into the lobby. I'm Jennifer Campos, she said, senior investigative reporter. What's this about murder? Sarah met her eyes. Operation Sandstorm, classified military mission. 23 soldiers killed, covered up by the Department of Defense and a defense contractor named Titan Security. Campos's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. You have proof? Sarah held up her phone. Photos. Documents. Testimony from a survivor. Campos looked at Ortega, at the blood seeping through his bandages, at the desperation in Sarah's face. Then she made a decision. Follow me. They moved through the building quickly, past cubicles and editing bays and conference rooms. Campos led them to a small studio with cameras and lighting equipment. She gestured to a chair. Sit, she said. Tell me everything. Sarah sat. Her ankle throbbed. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady as she started talking. She told Campos about Operation Sandstorm, the mission, the ambush, the cover-up. She showed her the photos from Brennan's computer. She explained how Titan Security had been selling American weapons to insurgent groups, how Colonel Hayes had authorized the operation and then killed everyone who knew about it. Campos listened without interrupting. When Sarah finished, she turned to her cameraman. Are you getting this? Every word. Campos looked back at Sarah. This is going to destroy a lot of powerful people. Good, Sarah said quietly. They'll come after you. They'll say you're lying, that you're unstable, that you're making it up for attention. Let them try. Campos pulled out her phone and started making calls to her producer, to the station manager, to lawyers. Within 20 minutes, the studio was full of people. Producers, editors, legal advisors, all of them talking at once. And then, in the middle of the chaos, the studio door opened. Dr. Marcus Brennan walked in, flanked by 2 police officers. That woman, Brennan said, pointing at Sarah, is wanted in connection with an assault at Riverside Medical Center. She needs to be arrested immediately. The officers moved towards Sarah, their hands on their weapons. Sarah stood, her bad ankle nearly giving out. He's lying. He's part of the cover-up. I have proof. She's delusional, Brennan said smoothly. She's a former soldier with severe PTSD. She attacked me in my office, destroyed hospital property, and jumped out a 3rd-story window. She's dangerous. Campos stepped between Sarah and the officers. This is a news station. You can't just walk in here and... I have a warrant, Brennan said, producing a folded document from his jacket. Reeves's hand went to his gun, but Sarah grabbed his wrist. Don't. Sarah. They want us to resist. They want an excuse. Sarah looked at the cameras, at the crew still filming everything. Let them arrest me. Let them put me in a cell. Just make sure that footage goes live. Campos nodded slowly. It'll be on the air in 1 hour. The officers moved forward, pulling Sarah's arms behind her back. The handcuffs clicked shut, cold metal against her wrists. Brennan smiled faintly. You should have stayed hidden, Lieutenant. Sarah met his eyes. You should have killed me when you had the chance. They dragged her out of the studio, down the hallway, through the lobby. News crews were arriving now, drawn by police scanners and tips from inside the station. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Sarah kept her head up, her expression calm. Let them see. Let the whole world see. They shoved her into the back of a police car. The door slammed shut and the vehicle pulled away from the news station, heading east into the industrial district. Sarah's chest tightened. This wasn't the route to the police station. She leaned forward, speaking through the metal grate separating her from the front seat. Where are you taking me? The driver didn't answer. The second officer turned around. He wasn't wearing a badge. His eyes were cold, empty. Somewhere quiet, he said. Sarah's blood turned to ice. These weren't real cops. They were Titan contractors dressed in stolen uniforms. The car turned onto a dark access road, leaving the city lights behind. Sarah tested the handcuffs. Standard issue, double-locked. She couldn't slip them without a key or something to pick the mechanism. The driver pulled off the road and into an empty construction site. Half-finished buildings loomed in the darkness, skeletal frames of concrete and steel. The car stopped. Both men got out. One opened Sarah's door and grabbed her arm, hauling her out of the vehicle. On your knees, he said. Sarah's mind raced. They were going to execute her, right here. No witnesses, no cameras. Her body would disappear into the construction site, and nobody would ever find it. She dropped to her knees, her bad ankle screaming. The second man pulled out a pistol and pressed it against the back of her head. Any last words, Lieutenant? Sarah closed her eyes. She thought about her unit, about the soldiers who'd died in the desert, about Ortega, barely alive, and Reeves still fighting, about the story that was about to go live on Channel 7. Yeah, she said quietly. You're too late. The man laughed. Too late for what? The interview went live 10 minutes ago. The whole city knows. You're blaming. Check your phone. The man hesitated. Then he pulled out his phone and swiped the screen. His expression changed. On the screen, Sarah's face filled the frame, her voice calm and clear, explaining everything. The documents, the proof, the names. The man's hand tightened on the gun. It doesn't matter. You'll still be dead. But everyone will know why. The gun pressed harder against her skull. And then, from somewhere in the darkness, a voice called out, Federal agents, drop your weapons. Flashlights blazed to life, illuminating the construction site. Men in tactical gear materialized from behind concrete pillars and steel beams, rifles raised, voices shouting commands. The two fake officers spun around, their weapons coming up, but they were surrounded, outgunned, trapped. One of them tried to run. A warning shot cracked through the air, and he stopped. Sarah stayed on her knees, not moving, barely breathing. A figure stepped forward, pulling off a tactical helmet. Sarah recognized him immediately. Special Agent David Torres, FBI. She'd met him once, years ago, during a joint training exercise. Torres knelt beside her and unlocked the handcuffs. Lieutenant Archer, hell of a way to resurface. Sarah's hands were shaking as she rubbed her wrists. How did you find me? Your friend Reeves called us the second they took you out of that news station. We've had you under surveillance since you entered the building. Torres helped her to her feet. Also, your interview caused quite a stir. My boss saw it live and ordered an immediate investigation. Sarah looked at the two fake officers being zip-tied and read their rights. What about Brennan? Hayes? Already in custody. We picked them up 20 minutes ago. Torres's expression was grim. This goes deeper than you think, Lieutenant. Titan Security has contracts with half a dozen federal agencies. When this hits the news cycle tomorrow, it's going to be a nightmare. Good, Sarah said quietly. Torres looked at her for a long moment. You know you're going to be testifying for months, right? Congressional hearings, criminal trials. Your life is about to become very public. I know. And there are still people out there who want you dead. This won't stop just because we arrested a few contractors and a dirty colonel. Sarah met his eyes. Then I guess I'll have to stay alive long enough to see them all go to prison. Torres smiled faintly. You're tougher than you look. I've heard that before. They walked back toward the waiting federal vehicles. Sarah's ankle was throbbing, her body exhausted, but her mind was clear. It wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't running. She was standing her ground, and she wasn't alone anymore. Torres opened the door of a black SUV. Come on, we need to get you checked out by medical, and then you need to tell us everything you know about Titan's operations. Sarah climbed into the vehicle. Through the window, she could see the Phoenix skyline in the distance, lit up against the night sky. Somewhere in that city, news crews were broadcasting her story. Somewhere, people were learning the truth about Operation Sandstorm. Somewhere, families of fallen soldiers were finally getting answers. The SUV pulled away from the construction site, heading back toward the city. And then Sarah's phone buzzed. She pulled it out, expecting a message from Reeves or Torres or someone from the FBI. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. You made a mistake going public, Lieutenant. Now everyone you care about is a target, starting with Ortega. Attached was a photo. Ortega, unconscious on a gurney, and standing beside him, holding a syringe filled with clear liquid, was a nurse Sarah didn't recognize. The timestamp on the photo was 2 minutes ago. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She looked at Torres. "Where's Ortega?" she demanded. Torres frowned. "The safe house, under federal protection. Why?" Sarah showed him the photo. Torres's expression changed. He grabbed his radio. "All units, this is Torres. I need eyes on the package at location 7, right now." Static crackled. Then a voice came through, tense and urgent. "Sir, we've got a situation. Someone just entered the building. Female, nurse's uniform. We're moving to intercept it." Gunshots erupted through the radio. Shouting. More gunshots. Then silence. Torres's face went pale. He shouted at the driver, "Go! Now!" The SUV's tires screamed as they accelerated through downtown Phoenix, sirens wailing, lights flashing. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. They were too late. Whoever was hunting them had just made their move, and this time they weren't leaving witnesses. The safe house was a single-story ranch home in a quiet residential neighborhood, the kind of place where nobody looked twice at unmarked vehicles parked on the street. By the time Torres's SUV screeched to a stop outside, 3 more federal vehicles had already arrived, agents pouring out with weapons drawn. Sarah was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped, her bad ankle protesting but holding. Torres grabbed her arm. "Stay back," he ordered. "That's my man in there. And he's our witness. Let us secure the scene." Sarah shook him off and limped toward the house. The front door hung open, one hinge torn from the frame. Glass from a shattered window glittered on the porch. Inside, she could hear voices shouting, boots on hardwood, the metallic sound of rifles being cleared. An agent appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Sir, you need to see this." Torres went in first. Sarah followed, ignoring his protests. The living room was a disaster. Furniture overturned, bullet holes in the walls, blood spattered across the carpet in dark streaks. 2 federal agents lay near the kitchen entrance, both hit multiple times. A third agent was slumped against the far wall, his hand pressed against a stomach wound, his face gray. But Ortega was gone. Sarah's chest tightened. She scanned the room, looking for anything that would tell her what happened. The gurney was still there, straps hanging loose, medical equipment scattered across the floor, an empty syringe near the overturned coffee table. Torres knelt beside the wounded agent. "Martinez, what happened?" Martinez coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Woman. Nurse uniform. She walked right past perimeter like she belonged here. By the time we realized something was wrong, she'd already taken out Davis and Foster." "Where's the patient?" She took him, dragged him out the back. Martinez's breathing was labored. "We tried to stop her, but she had backup. 2 men, tactical gear, military trained." "How long ago?" 5 minutes, maybe less." Torres was already on his radio, ordering roadblocks and helicopter surveillance. Sarah moved through the house, following the blood trail that led from the living room through the kitchen to the back door. Outside, tire tracks cut deep grooves through the lawn, heading toward the alley. They'd had a vehicle waiting. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened the photo again. The nurse in the image looked young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her expression was completely neutral, professional, like she was just doing her job. But Sarah recognized the cold efficiency in that face. She'd seen it before, overseas, in contractors who'd been doing wet work long enough that killing was just another task to check off a list. Reeves appeared at her side, breathing hard. "I came as soon as I heard. What the hell happened?" "They took him." Sarah's voice was flat. "Walked right past federal protection like it was nothing." "How is that possible?" "Because someone told them exactly where he'd be." Sarah looked at Torres, who was still coordinating the response. "Someone with access to federal communications. Someone inside." Reeves's jaw tightened. "You think there's a mole?" "I think Titan's been playing this game for a long time. They've got people everywhere." Sarah limped back toward the house. "We need to find out who that nurse is. Real ID, fake ID, whatever. She's the key." Inside, Torres was reviewing footage from the safe house security cameras. Sarah watched over his shoulder as the video played. The nurse walked up to the front door at 11:47 p.m., carrying a medical bag. She knocked. One of the agents answered, checked her credentials, let her in. 90 seconds later, both agents were dead. The footage showed her moving with brutal efficiency, knife through the first agent's throat before he could react, gun taken from his holster, 2 shots into the second agent's chest. Then she moved into the living room where Martinez had been standing guard over Ortega. Martinez got his weapon up, but the nurse was faster. She shot him in the stomach, then turned to Ortega. That's when her backup arrived. 2 men in tactical gear, entering through the back door. They grabbed Ortega while the nurse provided cover, and all 3 disappeared into the night. The whole thing took less than 4 minutes. Torres froze the video on the nurse's face. "I want this image sent to every law enforcement agency in the state. Someone has to recognize her." "They won't," Sarah said quietly. Torres looked at her. "Why not?" "Because people like her don't exist on paper. No criminal record, no military service, nothing that would flag in a database." Sarah stared at the frozen image. "She's a ghost, just like I was." "Then how do we find her?" Sarah thought for a moment. "Brennan, he hired her. He knows who she is." Torres shook his head. "Brennan lawyered up the second we arrested him. He's not talking." "Then we make him talk." "That's not how this works, Lieutenant. We have protocols. Your protocols just got 3 agents killed and my witness kidnapped." Sarah's voice was hard. "If we don't find Ortega in the next few hours, he's dead. So either you let me talk to Brennan, or I find another way." Torres studied her face for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. 20 minutes later, Sarah was sitting in an interrogation room at the FBI's Phoenix field office. The room was small, gray-walled, with a metal table and 2 chairs. A camera in the corner recorded everything. The door opened and 2 agents escorted Marcus Brennan inside. He looked different now. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit. His hands were cuffed in front of him, but his expression was still arrogant, still calm. He sat down across from Sarah and smiled faintly. "Lieutenant Archer, I heard you had quite the evening." Sarah didn't respond. 3 agents dead, your witness missing, all that work you did going public, and where did it get you?" Brennan leaned back in his chair. "You should have taken the quiet execution when you had the chance." "Who's the nurse?" Sarah asked. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The woman you hired to kill Ortega. Dark hair, late 20s, moves like special forces." "Who is she?" Brennan's smile widened. "Even if I knew, why would I tell you?" "Because right now you're looking at conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and accessory to multiple homicides. That's life in federal prison at minimum. But if you cooperate, if you help us find Ortega before they kill him, the prosecutor might consider a deal." "A deal?" Brennan laughed. "You really think I'm worried about prison time? The people I work for have lawyers who could get me out before breakfast. This is theater, Lieutenant, all of it." Sarah leaned forward. "The interview went live 2 hours ago. It's on every news channel in the country. Titan Security's stock dropped 40%. The DoD announced a full investigation. Your friends are abandoning you." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Brennan's face. "Colonel Hayes is cooperating," Sarah continued, lying smoothly. "He's giving up names, bank accounts, operations, everything. And you know what he said about you? That you were expendable. A useful idiot who thought he was part of the inner circle." Brennan's jaw tightened. "Hayes wouldn't. He already did." Sarah held up her phone, showing him a fabricated news headline. "Colonel Hayes agrees to testimony deal." You're the fall guy, Marcus. They're pinning everything on you. Brennan stared at the phone. His hands were shaking slightly now. But you can still get ahead of this, Sarah said quietly. Tell me who the nurse is. Tell me where they took Ortega. Help me stop this before more people die. Brennan was silent for a long moment. Then he looked up, his expression cold. Her name is Claire Voss, former CIA. Black Ops. She's been doing freelance work for Titan for the past 5 years. He paused. And if she has your witness, he's already dead. Voss doesn't leave loose ends. Where would she take him? I don't know. Somewhere remote. Somewhere they can dispose of the body without witnesses. Brennan leaned forward. But I can tell you where she'll be tomorrow night. There's a Titan facility north of Scottsdale. Abandoned warehouse district. They use it for training and equipment storage. Voss reports there after every operation. Why would you tell me this? Brennan's smile returned, bitter and thin. Because you're right. They are throwing me under the bus. And if I'm going down, I'm taking everyone with me. Sarah stood and walked to the door. She knocked once, and Torres opened it from the outside. Get a tactical team together, Sarah said. We're hitting that warehouse. Torres nodded. Already on it. Sarah looked back at Brennan one last time. He was staring at the table now, his hands still shaking. One more thing, Sarah said. How did you get involved with Titan in the first place? Brennan didn't look up. Money. How else? They paid me to look the other way, to falsify a few medical records. I thought it was just standard contractor corruption. I didn't know what they were really doing until it was too late. He laughed bitterly. By then, I was in too deep to get out. Sarah left the room without another word. The warehouse was exactly where Brennan said it would be. A sprawling concrete structure in an industrial zone northeast of Scottsdale. No lights. No signs. No vehicles visible from the street. But the thermal imaging from the FBI helicopter showed heat signatures inside. At least 6 people. Maybe more. Sarah watched the feed from inside Torres's command vehicle, parked 2 blocks away. The tactical team was gearing up. Body armor, night vision, automatic weapons, 20 agents total, all trained for high-risk operations. Torres looked at Sarah. You're staying here. No chance. Lieutenant, you're a witness, not law enforcement, and you've got a sprained ankle. You'll slow us down. I've done more overseas with worse injuries. Sarah grabbed a tactical vest from the equipment rack. Ortega was my responsibility. I'm going in. Torres looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Sarah's expression stopped him. He sighed and handed her a pistol. Stay behind the entry team. Don't engage unless absolutely necessary, and if things go sideways, you get out. Understood? Sarah nodded and checked the pistol's magazine. Fully loaded, 1 in the chamber. They moved out at 3:17 a.m., using the darkness for cover. The tactical team split into 3 groups: entry team, perimeter security, and overwatch. Sarah stayed with the entry team, moving in formation as they approached the warehouse's main entrance. The door was unlocked. That should have been the first warning. The team moved inside, weapons raised, night vision turning the darkness into grainy green images. The warehouse was mostly empty. Concrete floors, exposed ceiling beams, stacks of old pallets. But there were signs of recent activity. Fresh tire tracks, discarded equipment. A medical gurney pushed against the far wall. Blood on the concrete floor. Sarah's chest tightened. The blood trail led toward a back room. The door closed. The team leader signaled for everyone to hold position. Then he moved forward, testing the door handle. Locked. He stepped back and nodded to the breacher, who placed a small explosive charge on the hinges. Everyone moved to cover positions. The charge detonated with a sharp crack, and the door blew inward. The team rushed inside, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The room was small, windowless. Medical equipment lined one wall, monitors, IV stands, a portable ultrasound machine. And in the center of the room, strapped to a metal chair, was Danny Ortega. He was alive, barely. His head hung forward, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. Fresh bandages covered his shoulder, but blood had soaked through. His face was bruised, swollen. Sarah pushed past the entry team and knelt beside him. Danny, can you hear me? Ortega's eyes fluttered open. Recognition flickered across his face. Lieutenant, he whispered, we're getting you out of here. No! Ortega's hand shot out, grabbing Sarah's wrist with surprising strength. Trap! It's a trap. Sarah's blood went cold. She looked around the room, suddenly seeing details she'd missed before. The medical equipment was too clean, too new. The room too organized. This wasn't an interrogation site. It was a kill box. "Everyone out!" Sarah shouted. "Now!" The team started to move, but it was already too late. Explosions ripped through the warehouse. Charges placed along the walls, timed perfectly to collapse the structure inward. The ceiling buckled, concrete and steel beams crashing down. Someone screamed. Gunfire erupted from somewhere in the darkness. Sarah threw herself over Ortega as debris rained down around them. Something hit her back, hard, driving the air from her lungs. Pain exploded through her shoulder. Then the lights went out completely. Sarah woke to the sound of groaning metal and distant sirens. Her ears were ringing, her vision blurred. She was lying on her side, pinned under a fallen beam. Dust filled her lungs every time she tried to breathe. She pushed against the beam, her muscles screaming, and managed to roll out from under it. Her shoulder was dislocated. She could feel the joint sitting wrong, could see the unnatural angle of her arm. Ortega was still in the chair, miraculously untouched by the collapse. His eyes were closed, but his chest was still moving. Sarah forced herself up, her bad ankle nearly giving out. Around her, the warehouse was a disaster zone. Bodies lay scattered among the debris, some moving, some not. She could hear voices calling out, could see flashlights cutting through the dust. And then, through the smoke and wreckage, a figure appeared. Claire Voss walked through the destruction like she was strolling through a park. She had a pistol in one hand, a tactical knife in the other. Her nurse uniform was gone, replaced by black tactical gear. "Lieutenant Archer," Voss said calmly, "I was hoping you'd survive. Makes this more satisfying." Sarah reached for her weapon, but it was gone, lost somewhere in the collapse. Voss raised her pistol. "Any last words?" Sarah met her eyes. "Yeah, behind you." Voss smiled. "Really? That's the best you—" The shot came from somewhere in the darkness. Voss jerked forward, her pistol clattering to the ground. She looked down at the hole in her chest, confusion spreading across her face. Then she collapsed. Jacob Reeves stepped out of the shadows, his rifle still raised. "You okay?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Reeves moved past Voss's body and started cutting Ortega loose from the chair. "We need to move. The whole building's coming down." Together they carried Ortega through the wreckage, climbing over broken concrete and twisted metal. Sarah's dislocated shoulder screamed with every movement, but she didn't stop. They emerged into the cold night air just as the rest of the building collapsed behind them. Emergency vehicles surrounded the site, ambulances, fire trucks, police cars. Torres was there, covered in dust but alive, shouting orders into his radio. Paramedics rushed forward, taking Ortega from Sarah's arms. She watched them load him into an ambulance, watched the doors close, watched the vehicle pull away with lights flashing. Torres appeared at her side. "We got 12 survivors out of 20, 8 dead, including 4 civilians who were being held in a back room we didn't know about." Sarah's stomach twisted. Civilians? Titan employees who were going to testify against the company. Voss was cleaning house. Torres looked at her. "You saved a lot of lives tonight, Lieutenant." "Not enough?" "Never is." Torres gestured to a waiting ambulance. "Get yourself checked out. That shoulder needs attention." Sarah nodded numbly and let the paramedics guide her away. The next 72 hours blurred together. Sarah's shoulder was relocated and immobilized. Her ankle was wrapped and elevated. She spent 6 hours giving testimony to federal investigators, answering questions about Operation Sandstorm, Titan Security, Dr. Brennan, Colonel Hayes, and everything she'd uncovered. The news cycle exploded. Every channel ran the story. Military cover-up exposed. Defense contractor under investigation. Decorated colonel arrested for murder. Sarah watched it all from a hospital bed, her phone buzzing constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and people she hadn't spoken to in years. On the third day, Torres visited her room. "Thought you'd want an update," he said, sitting in the chair beside her bed. "Brennan's cooperating fully now. He's given us names, locations, financial records. The DoD has already suspended all contracts with Titan Security, and the company's executives are being rounded up for questioning." "What about Hayes?" "He's still claiming he was following orders from higher up the chain. Says he has evidence that proves he was acting on direct orders from Pentagon officials. Torres paused. If he's telling the truth, this goes a lot deeper than we thought. Sarah stared at the ceiling. How deep? Congressional Oversight Committee deep, Senate investigation deep, possibly presidential briefing deep. Torres leaned forward. Sarah, this is going to be a years-long process. Trials, testimony, media scrutiny. Are you ready for that? Do I have a choice? You always have a choice. Sarah looked at him. What would you do? Torres was quiet for a moment. I'd finish what I started. Those soldiers who died in the desert deserve justice. And the only way they get it is if someone's willing to stand up and tell the truth, no matter how long it takes. Sarah nodded slowly. Then that's what I'll do. Torres stood. There's someone here to see you. He stepped out, and a moment later Danny Ortega walked in. He looked better, still pale, still weak, but alive. His shoulder was bandaged, his arm in a sling. He moved carefully, like every step hurt, but he was smiling. Lieutenant? He said quietly. Danny. Sarah tried to sit up, but her shoulder protested. You should be resting. So should you. Ortega sat down in the chair Torres had vacated. I wanted to thank you for coming back for me, for not giving up. You would have done the same. Maybe. Ortega looked at his hands. I've been thinking about the others, the ones who didn't make it. Rodriguez, Williams, Patterson, all of them. They deserve to be remembered. They will be. Because of you. Ortega met her eyes. You could have stayed hidden, Lieutenant. You could have let the past stay buried. But you didn't. You came back, you fought, and now everyone knows what really happened. Sarah's throat tightened. I just did what was necessary. No. You did what was right. There's a difference. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Ortega stood. The FBI wants me in protective custody until the trials are over, he said. I'll probably be in some safe house for the next year testifying and giving depositions. But after that, I'm thinking about going back to school. Maybe becoming a teacher. Sarah smiled faintly. You'd be good at that. What about you? What's next? Sarah looked out the window at the Phoenix skyline. I don't know yet. Well, whatever it is, I hope it's something that lets you sleep at night. Ortega moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Lieutenant. The rest of the unit, the ones who survived, they're watching the news. They're seeing what you did, and they're coming forward, all of them. Sarah's chest tightened. How many? 6. 6 survivors out of 23. Ortega's voice was thick with emotion. You gave them the courage to stop hiding, to tell their stories, to finally get justice for everyone we lost. He left before Sarah could respond. She sat alone in the hospital room, staring at the news playing silently on the wall-mounted television. Her face filled the screen, footage from the interview, from the warehouse raid, from her being escorted into the FBI building for testimony. The woman everyone had dismissed. The nurse nobody had taken seriously, the soldier they'd tried to erase. Now everyone knew her name. On the 5th day, Sarah was discharged from the hospital. Torres offered to arrange security, but Sarah declined. She was done hiding. She walked out of the hospital alone, wearing borrowed clothes and a sling for her shoulder. Reporters were waiting outside, cameras and microphones thrust toward her face. Lieutenant Archer, can you comment on Colonel Hayes' arrest? Is it true you've been offered a book deal? What message do you have for other whistleblowers? Sarah ignored them all. She walked past the cameras, past the questions, past the chaos. And then she stopped. She turned back toward the reporters and spoke clearly, her voice steady. The soldiers who died in Operation Sandstorm were heroes. They trusted their leaders to protect them, and they were betrayed. What happened to them was wrong, and everyone responsible will answer for it. She paused. That's all I have to say. She turned and kept walking. A car pulled up beside her, Reeves behind the wheel. Need a ride? He asked. Sarah climbed into the passenger seat without a word. They drove in silence for a while, leaving the hospital and the reporters behind. Finally, Reeves spoke. You did good, Sarah. Better than good. People died. People always die. But you made sure they didn't die for nothing. Reeves glanced at her. What now? Sarah looked out the window. I don't know. Maybe I find a new hospital, new city, new name. Or maybe you stop running. Sarah met his eyes. What's that supposed to mean? It means you spent 3 years hiding because you thought that's what you had to do to survive. But you're not hiding anymore. You're not running. You're standing right out in the open, and you're still alive. Reeves smiled faintly. Maybe it's time to figure out who Sarah Mitchell really is when she's not pretending to be someone else. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Maybe. Reeves dropped her off at a small apartment building on the edge of Phoenix, a temporary safe house arranged by the FBI until the trials were over. Sarah took the elevator to the 3rd floor and unlocked the door to her new place. It was small, clean, anonymous. But it was hers. She set her bag down and walked to the window. Outside, the city spread out beneath the desert sky, lights twinkling in the darkness. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Urgent. Meet me at the old airfield tomorrow at noon. Come alone." No signature. No name. Sarah stared at the message, her instincts screaming that this was a trap. But she'd been following her instincts for 3 years, and it had led her here. Broken shoulder, national news exposure, federal trials looming. Maybe it was time to take a different approach. She typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. Someone who knows what really happened in the desert. Someone Hayes and Brennan were protecting. Someone who's not done cleaning up yet. Sarah's blood went cold. If Voss failed, there are others, and they won't stop until everyone connected to Sandstorm is dead, including you. Another message. "Come tomorrow. Or don't. Either way, this ends soon." Sarah set the phone down and stared at it for a long moment. Then she picked it back up and dialed Torres. "I just got a message," she said when he answered. "Someone claiming they know what really happened. They want to meet." Torres was quiet for a second. "It's a trap." "Probably." "Then why are you even considering it? Because if it's not, if there's someone else out there with answers, we need to know." Sarah looked out the window again. "This isn't over, Torres. Brennan and Hayes were middle management. Someone higher up gave the orders, someone with enough power to keep this buried for 3 years. And you think this mystery person is just going to confess?" "I think they're going to try to kill me." Sarah's voice was calm. "But maybe, if I'm careful, I can get them to talk first." Torres sighed. "Where and when?" "Old airfield north of the city, tomorrow at noon. I'll have a team in position by 11. Full tactical support. Snipers. The works." "No." Sarah's voice was firm. "They said come alone. If they see federal agents, they'll disappear." "Sarah, I'm going, Torres, with or without backup. Your choice is whether you want eyes on the situation or not." Torres cursed under his breath. "Fine, but you wear a wire, and you follow protocol. The second things go sideways, you signal for extraction." "Deal." Sarah hung up and looked at her reflection in the dark window. Tomorrow she'd find out who'd really been pulling the strings, and one way or another, this would end. The old airfield had been abandoned for decades. Cracked runways stretched across the desert like scars, weeds pushing through broken asphalt. Rusted hangars leaned at odd angles, their metal walls baking under the noon sun. Sarah arrived 20 minutes early, driving a borrowed sedan with tinted windows. The wire Torres had given her was taped to her ribs, hidden beneath a loose shirt. It itched. Her dislocated shoulder ached despite the medication. Her sprained ankle throbbed with every step. But she was here. She parked near the main hangar and got out slowly, scanning the area. Empty. Silent except for the wind whistling through broken metal. The desert heat hit her like a wall. Sarah walked toward the hangar entrance, her hand instinctively going to the pistol concealed at the small of her back. Torres had 3 sniper teams positioned on surrounding ridges, invisible to anyone on the ground. A tactical unit waited 2 miles away, ready to move in if she signaled. But right now, she was alone. The hangar door hung half open. Sarah stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. Sunlight streamed through holes in the roof, creating columns of dusty light. Old aircraft parts lay scattered across the concrete floor, propellers, engine blocks, sections of fuselage. And standing in the center of the hangar, backlit by one of those light columns, was a woman Sarah hadn't seen in 3 years. Major Linda Garrett had been the logistics officer for Operation Sandstorm. She'd been the one who'd planned their routes, arranged their supplies, coordinated their extraction. Sarah remembered her as efficient, no nonsense, someone who got things done without drama. But the woman standing in front of her now looked different, thinner, harder. Her dark hair was cut short, almost military regulation again. She wore civilian clothes, jeans and a jacket, but her posture was all military. "Lieutenant Archer," Garrett said quietly. "Or should I call you Sarah Mitchell? Now." Sarah stopped 10 feet away, keeping distance between them. "Major Garrett, I thought you were dead. So did everyone else. That was the point." Garrett's voice was flat, emotionless. "After the ambush, after Hayes pulled you out and left the rest of us to die, I realized something. The people who set us up weren't going to stop. They were going to keep cleaning up loose ends until everyone who knew the truth was gone. So you disappeared. I survived." Garrett stepped forward slightly. "I changed my name, changed my face. Spent 3 years tracking down everyone involved in the cover-up. Brennan was easy, arrogant, careless. Hayes was harder. But the real architects, the ones who gave the orders, they were ghosts." Sarah's hand stayed near her weapon. "Why contact me now?" "Because you went public. You exposed everything I'd been working toward for 3 years. And now the real targets know we're coming." Garrett's expression hardened. "You ruined it, Sarah. You ruined everything." Sarah's blood went cold. "You're not here to help me." "No." Garrett pulled a pistol from her jacket. "I'm here to clean up the last witness." Sarah's hand moved toward her own weapon, but Garrett was faster. The shot cracked through the hanger, and Sarah felt something punch into her left side, just below her ribs. She stumbled backward, her vision blurring. "I'm sorry," Garrett said, her voice still flat. "But you were never supposed to survive this long." Sarah hit the ground hard, her breath knocked out of her lungs. Pain exploded through her torso. She could feel blood spreading warm and wet across her shirt. The wire. Torres would have heard the shot. Help was coming, but would it arrive in time? Garrett walked closer, her pistol still raised. "You should have stayed dead, Sarah. Should have kept your head down. But you had to be the hero. You had to expose everything." Sarah's hand found her own weapon. She pulled it free, but her grip was weak, her vision swimming. "Brennan and Hayes were patsies," Garrett continued. "Mid-level operators who thought they were important. The real money, the real power, it's higher up the chain. People you've never heard of. People who make colonels and surgeons disappear when they become liabilities." Sarah tried to aim, but her hand was shaking too badly. "I've been hunting them for 3 years," Garrett said. "Getting close. Building cases. And then you went on television and warned them all. Now they're covering their tracks, destroying evidence. My 3 years of work, gone because you needed to play soldier one more time." "You're wrong," Sarah managed to say, her voice weak. "About what?" "About it being over." Sarah's finger found the trigger. "Torres heard everything. You're on tape confessing. It's done." Garrett's expression flickered. Uncertainty, then rage. "Then I guess we're both dead." She raised her pistol to fire again. The shot came from outside the hangar, a sniper's rifle, the sound distant but unmistakable. The bullet caught Garrett in the shoulder, spinning her sideways. Her pistol clattered to the concrete. Sarah forced herself up onto one elbow, her own weapon finally steady. She aimed at Garrett's chest. "Don't move." Garrett clutched her bleeding shoulder, her face twisted in pain and fury. "You think this changes anything? You think arresting me stops them?" "No." Sarah's voice was stronger now, despite the blood soaking her shirt. "But it's a start." Footsteps echoed outside the hangar. Torres burst through the entrance with a dozen agents behind him, weapons drawn. He saw Sarah on the ground, saw the blood, and his face went pale. "Get a medic!" he shouted. Agents swarmed Garrett, forcing her to the ground, securing her hands behind her back. She didn't resist. She just stared at Sarah with empty eyes. "You still don't understand," Garrett said quietly. "The people at the top, they're untouchable. You exposed the middle management. Congratulations. But the real architects are already gone. New names, new positions. They'll rebuild everything in 6 months, and nobody will remember Operation Sandstorm." Sarah met her eyes. "Maybe. But every soldier who died that day will be remembered. Their families will know the truth. And everyone who helped cover it up will face consequences." She paused. "That's enough." Garrett laughed bitterly as the agents hauled her to her feet. "You always were an idealist, Lieutenant. That's why you'll never win." "I already did," Sarah said quietly. They dragged Garrett outside. Paramedics rushed to Sarah, cutting away her shirt, applying pressure to the gunshot wound. The bullet had gone through clean, missed vital organs, but she was losing blood fast. Torres knelt beside her. "Stay with me, Sarah. Helicopter's 2 minutes out." Sarah's vision was fading at the edges. "Did you get it all? On tape?" "Every word. Garrett just confessed to multiple murders and conspiracy. She's done." Torres's voice was tight. "You did it. It's over." Sarah closed her eyes. "Not yet." The next 3 weeks were a blur of surgeries, recovery, and testimony. Sarah spent most of it in a hospital bed, her side wrapped in bandages, tubes running from her arms. But even from the hospital, she watched as the dominoes fell. Major Linda Garrett was charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice. During interrogation, she gave up names, not the top-level architects she'd been hunting, but mid-level operators, financiers, and logistics coordinators who'd helped Titan Security run their illegal operations. Dr. Marcus Brennan pleaded guilty to conspiracy and evidence tampering in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison and permanently stripped of his medical license. Colonel Victor Hayes went to trial. The evidence was overwhelming: financial records, communications, testimony from multiple witnesses. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning a verdict, guilty on all counts. He received life in federal prison without possibility of parole. Titan Security's CEO and 3 board members were arrested on charges ranging from weapons trafficking to murder for hire. The company was dissolved, its assets seized, its contracts terminated. And across the country, families of soldiers killed in Operation Sandstorm finally learned the truth about how their loved ones died. Sarah watched it all from her hospital room, her phone buzzing constantly with messages from reporters, lawyers, and advocacy groups. But she ignored most of them, because there was one call she needed to make first. On a gray morning, 4 weeks after the airfield confrontation, Sarah was released from the hospital. Torres drove her to a small cemetery on the outskirts of Phoenix, where 23 new headstones had been placed in a quiet corner under desert oak trees. The names of her unit. The soldiers who died in Operation Sandstorm, finally honored, finally remembered. Sarah stood in front of those stones for a long time, her shoulders still aching, her side still healing. Torres waited by the car, giving her space. "I'm sorry it took so long," Sarah said quietly to the names carved in granite. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. But everyone knows now. Everyone knows what you did, what you sacrificed." The wind whispered through the trees, carrying dust and memory. "You weren't forgotten," Sarah continued, her voice breaking. "You were never forgotten." She stayed until the sun started to set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. Then she walked back to the car, where Torres was waiting. "You okay?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "I will be." 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee in Washington, D.C., giving testimony about defense contractor oversight and military accountability. The hearing room was packed: senators, military officials, journalists, families of fallen soldiers. Sarah's voice was steady as she spoke, recounting the events of Operation Sandstorm, the cover-up, and the 3-year hunt that had finally brought the truth to light. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She didn't protect anyone. When she finished, the committee chairman, a gray-haired senator from Texas, leaned forward. "Ms. Archer, you've shown remarkable courage in coming forward, but I have to ask, what do you hope comes from all this? What do you want people to take away from your testimony?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she looked directly at the cameras. "I want people to understand that silence protects the powerful and destroys the vulnerable. I spent 3 years hiding because I thought that's what survival looked like. But survival isn't enough. Not when people are dying, not when criminals are protected by the institutions that should be holding them accountable." She paused, gathering her thoughts. The soldiers who died in Operation Sandstorm trusted their leaders. They believed the system would protect them. And when that system failed, when their leaders betrayed them, they paid with their lives. Sarah's voice was firm now. "I'm here because someone needs to say out loud what everyone already knows. The system is broken, and it won't fix itself. It requires people who are willing to stand up, speak truth, and refuse to be silenced." The room was completely silent. So what do I want people to take away? Sarah continued. I want them to know that being underestimated isn't a weakness. Being dismissed isn't defeat. Sometimes the people everyone ignores are the ones who end up changing everything. The chairman nodded slowly. Thank you, Ms. Archer. Your testimony has been invaluable. After the hearing, Sarah walked through the halls of the Senate building alone. Her shoulder had healed. Her side still ached sometimes, especially when it rained, but she was whole again. Outside, reporters were waiting, but Sarah didn't stop to answer questions. She just kept walking, out of the building, down the steps, into the sunlight. Reeves was waiting by a black sedan at the curb. How'd it go? He asked. Good, I think. Sarah climbed into the passenger seat. They're drafting new oversight legislation, creating independent review boards, actually holding contractors accountable. Think it'll make a difference? Maybe, maybe not. Sarah looked out the window as they pulled away from the Capitol. But at least people are paying attention now. They drove in comfortable silence for a while. Then Reeves spoke. I've got a job offer for you. Sarah looked at him. What kind of job? Private consulting firm. We work with military families, help them navigate the VA system, fight for benefits, investigate suspicious deaths. It's mostly paperwork and bureaucracy, but sometimes we uncover things that need attention. He paused. We could use someone with your experience, someone who knows how the system works and isn't afraid to fight it. Sarah considered this. Sounds like a lot of work. It is. But it's work that matters. Reeves glanced at her. You don't have to decide now. Think about it. Sarah nodded slowly. I will. 8 months after going public, Sarah found herself standing outside Riverside Medical Center in Phoenix. The hospital looked the same glass doors, same parking lot, same emergency entrance where military vehicles had crashed through all those months ago. But everything had changed. The hospital had been completely restructured. Dr. Marcus Brennan's entire department had been investigated, with several doctors and administrators fired for ethics violations. New leadership had been brought in, new protocols established. Sarah walked through the main entrance, her visitor badge clipped to her jacket. Grace, the charge nurse who'd once been her only ally, met her in the lobby. Sarah. Grace pulled her into a careful hug. It's so good to see you. You too. Grace led her through the hospital, past the trauma bay where everything had started, up to the 3rd floor. They stopped in front of a conference room where a group of nurses and medical students were gathered. They asked me to speak, Sarah explained, about whistleblowing, about speaking up when you see something wrong. Grace smiled. Good. They need to hear it from someone who actually did it. Sarah entered the conference room and 20 faces turned toward her. Young nurses, students, people just starting their careers. She stood at the front of the room and began. My name is Sarah Mitchell. Some of you might know me as Lieutenant Sarah Archer. For 11 months, I worked in this hospital, and most of that time people treated me like I was invisible, like I didn't matter. She paused, meeting their eyes. I want to talk to you today about what it means to stand up when everyone tells you to sit down, what it costs, what you gain, and why it's worth it even when it feels impossible. She told them her story, not the dramatic parts, not the shootouts and explosions. She told them about the small moments, the time she questioned unsafe orders and got written up, the time she spoke up about dangerous protocols and was told to mind her own business, the time she was right and still got punished for it. Here's what I learned, Sarah said. Being right doesn't protect you. Being competent doesn't protect you. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything. The room was silent. But here's what else I learned. Silence costs more. When you stay quiet because you're afraid of losing your job, afraid of being labeled difficult, afraid of standing alone, that silence enables the people who are doing harm. It protects them. It gives them permission to keep going. A young nurse raised her hand. But what if speaking up doesn't change anything? What if nobody listens? Sarah smiled faintly. Then you speak louder. You document everything. You find allies. You go over heads if you have to, and if all else fails, you walk away and find somewhere that deserves your integrity. Another voice. Aren't you afraid of retaliation, even now? Every day, Sarah admitted. But I'm more afraid of looking back in 20 years and realizing I stayed silent when I should have spoken, that I chose comfort over courage. She spent an hour with them, answering questions, sharing experiences, offering advice. When it was over, several nurses approached her privately, telling her about situations in their own hospitals, about doctors who needed to be reported, about unsafe practices they'd been too afraid to challenge. Sarah listened to all of them, took their information, promised to help however she could, because that's what this was really about, not the dramatic exposés or the Senate hearings. It was about giving other people permission to speak up, to refuse to accept corruption and abuse as just how things were. As Sarah left the hospital that day, she passed the emergency room where everything had started. She stopped for a moment, remembering the night military vehicles had crashed through those doors, remembering the fear and chaos and the moment her past had caught up with her. She'd been terrified that night, certain she was going to die. But she hadn't died. She'd survived, and not just survived, she'd fought back. She'd exposed the truth. She'd changed things. The glass door slid open, and Sarah walked out into the Phoenix sunlight. Her phone buzzed. A text from Reeves. "Thought about that job offer?" Sarah typed back. "When do I start?" The response came immediately. "Monday. Welcome to the team." Sarah smiled and pocketed her phone. 18 months after the interview that changed everything, Sarah stood in front of a mirror in a hotel room in Washington, D.C., adjusting her jacket. She was about to receive the Secretary of Defense Medal for Valor, a civilian award given to those who showed extraordinary courage in the face of danger. She'd tried to decline it, told them she didn't do what she did for recognition. But Torres had convinced her to accept. "It's not about you," he'd said. "It's about everyone who's still too afraid to come forward. When they see you standing on that stage, receiving that medal, they'll know it's possible. They'll know speaking up doesn't always end in disaster." So Sarah had agreed. Now, standing in that hotel room, she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Not because she looked different, though her hair was longer now, darker, closer to her natural color, but because she looked solid, present, real. For 3 years, she'd been a ghost. A woman without a past, without a future, just surviving day to day. Now she had both. The ceremony was held in a large ballroom, packed with military officials, politicians, journalists, and families of the soldiers who died in Operation Sandstorm. Sarah walked onto the stage, her steps steady, despite the hundreds of eyes watching her. The Secretary of Defense stepped forward, holding the medal. Lieutenant Sarah Archer demonstrated exceptional courage and integrity in exposing systematic corruption within military and contractor operations, he read from a prepared statement. Her actions directly led to the prosecution of multiple individuals involved in criminal conspiracy, weapons trafficking, and murder. Through her testimony and cooperation with federal authorities, she ensured that 23 fallen soldiers received the recognition and honor they deserved. He pinned the medal to her jacket. "On behalf of the United States Department of Defense, I thank you for your service and your sacrifice." The room erupted in applause. Sarah stood there, feeling the weight of the medal, the weight of the moment. She looked out at the audience and saw Reeves standing in the back, giving her a slight nod. Saw Ortega in the front row, looking healthy and whole. Saw the families of her fallen soldiers, some crying, some smiling, all of them finally having some measure of closure. Later, at the reception, Sarah was approached by a young woman in an army uniform, a lieutenant, fresh-faced and earnest. "Ms. Archer," the lieutenant said nervously, "I just wanted to say thank you. I was about to report safety violations in my unit, but I was afraid. After seeing what you did, I found the courage to go through with it. They're investigating now." Sarah smiled. "Good. Don't let anyone silence you." "I won't," the lieutenant promised. As the night wore on, Sarah found herself standing on a balcony overlooking the city, taking a moment of quiet. The medal felt heavy on her chest. Torres joined her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Congratulations." Sarah took a glass. "Thanks. You know the president wants to meet you tomorrow. Photo op at the White House." "Of course she does." Torres smiled. "You've become a symbol, Sarah. For whistleblowers, for nurses, for anyone who's ever been told to keep their head down and stay quiet." "I didn't ask for that." "Nobody asks for it, but here you are." Torres raised his glass. "To the woman who was underestimated by everyone and defeated them all anyway." Sarah clinked her glass against his. "To the soldiers who didn't make it home." "To the soldiers who didn't make it home," Torres echoed. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights. "What's next for you?" Torres asked eventually. Sarah thought about the consulting firm, about the families they'd already helped, the cases they were building, the systems they were challenging, about the young nurses and soldiers who reached out to her every day, looking for guidance, for courage, for permission to speak up. "I'm going to keep fighting," Sarah said simply, "for as long as it takes." "Good," Torres said. "We need people like you." Sarah looked at him. "People like me? People who refuse to accept corruption as normal, who won't stay quiet just because it's easier, who understand that real courage isn't about being fearless, it's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway." Sarah smiled faintly. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," Torres grinned, "but someone's got to do it." 3 years after walking into Riverside Medical Center as a ghost trying to stay invisible, Sarah Mitchell stood in front of a room full of journalists at a press conference in downtown Phoenix. Her consulting firm had just released a report documenting systemic failures in military contractor oversight, recommending sweeping reforms. The report made national news, congressional hearings were scheduled, legislation was being drafted. During the Q&A portion, a reporter asked the question Sarah had been expecting. "Ms. Archer, some critics say you're too aggressive, that you're attacking institutions instead of working within the system. How do you respond?" Sarah leaned forward slightly, her voice clear and steady. "The system protected murderers and criminals for 3 years while good soldiers died and their families got lied to. The system told me to stay quiet, to trust the chain of command, to believe that justice would eventually happen." She paused. "The system failed. So yes, I'm attacking it, because it needs to be torn down and rebuilt with transparency and accountability." Another reporter: "Do you regret going public? Has it been worth the cost?" Sarah thought about the surgeries, the death threats she still received occasionally, the relationships she'd lost, the nightmares that still woke her up sometimes. "Every single day, I think about the cost," she said honestly. "But then I think about the families who finally got answers, about the soldiers whose names are now on memorials instead of forgotten in classified files, about the young people who reached out to tell me they found the courage to speak up because I did." She met the reporter's eyes. "So, yes, it's been worth it." That night, Sarah returned to her apartment, no longer a safe house, just a normal place she'd chosen because she liked the neighborhood. She made dinner, watched the news coverage of the press conference, answered emails from people asking for help with their own cases. Her phone rang, Ortega's name on the screen. "Hey, Danny, saw you on TV. You looked good." His voice was warm. "Listen, I'm starting a foundation for families of soldiers killed by contractor negligence. We're going to fund legal representation, push for policy changes, all of it, and I want you on the board of directors." Sarah smiled. "Send me the details." "Will do." "Also, the 6 of us, the survivors from the unit, we're meeting next month. Remembrance ceremony for the others. You should come." "I'll be there." After they hung up, Sarah walked to her window and looked out at the Phoenix skyline, the city that had been her hiding place. The city where she'd almost died multiple times. The city where she'd finally stopped running. She thought about Lieutenant Sarah Archer, the soldier she'd been, the woman who'd led troops into combat, the person who'd been declared dead and erased from official records. And she thought about Sarah Mitchell, the nurse everyone had dismissed, the woman who'd been treated like she was invisible, the person who'd refused to stay silent even when silence would have been safer. They were both her, different pieces of the same person. The soldier and the nurse, the warrior and the healer, the woman who'd been underestimated and the woman who'd proven everyone wrong. Sarah touched the medal on her dresser, the Secretary of Defense medal for Valor. It was heavy, solid, real. But the real weight she carried was different. It was the responsibility to keep fighting, to keep speaking up, to keep being the voice for people who couldn't speak for themselves. It was exhausting. It was dangerous. It was lonely sometimes. But it was also exactly what she was meant to do, because Sarah had learned something in those 3 years of hiding, in those months of fighting back, in those endless hours of testimony and interviews and battles. Being underestimated was a gift. When people thought you were weak, they didn't watch you as carefully. When they dismissed you as unimportant, they underestimated what you were capable of. When they treated you like you didn't matter, they gave you the freedom to move unseen. And when you finally stood up, when you finally showed them exactly who you were, the impact was devastating. Sarah Mitchell had been underestimated by everyone, Doctors who thought she was just a difficult nurse, colleagues who thought she was cold and broken, criminals who thought she'd stay buried. A system that thought one person couldn't make a difference. They'd all been wrong. And now, standing in her apartment with the city lights spreading out beneath the desert sky, Sarah understood something fundamental about power and courage and change. Real strength wasn't about being the loudest person in the room. It wasn't about being fearless or perfect or invincible. Real strength was about showing up anyway, about speaking truth even when your voice shook, about standing your ground when everyone told you to run, about refusing to accept that this is just how things are and demanding better. Real strength was about being underestimated and not caring, about being dismissed and proving them wrong, about being told you're nothing special and changing the world anyway. Sarah picked up her laptop and opened her email. 50 new messages from people asking for help, for advice, for someone to listen to their stories of corruption and abuse and systems that failed them. She started typing responses, because the work wasn't done. It would never be done. But that was okay. Sarah Mitchell, Lieutenant Sarah Archer, the woman who'd been erased and came back stronger, who'd been silenced and spoke louder, who'd been underestimated and defeated everyone who counted her out, was just getting started. And this time, she wasn't hiding. This time, the whole world was watching. And she was ready.